In the quiet town of Riverview, the kind of place where everyone knew each other by name, Ethan Miller and his wife Clare appeared to have the perfect life. Ethan worked as a respected pharmacist, and Clare, a school administrator, was beloved for her warmth and dedication. They lived in a modest but beautiful two-story house on Oak Ridge Lane, the kind of home that radiated stability and middle-class success. Yet behind the freshly cut lawn and Sunday barbecues, something had begun to fester. Ethan had a twin brother, Aaron, the wild one, as Riverview locals often called him. While Ethan built a stable life, Aaron drifted between jobs and relationships, charming but unreliable. He lived only a few miles away, popping into Ethan and Clare's lives often enough to be a familiar, if chaotic, presence. Ethan, fiercely loyal to family, always made excuses for Aaron's behavior, much to Clare's quiet frustration. What no one outside their home realized was that Clare's frustration had quietly mutated into something else, a secret. Over the past year, what began as friendly chats between Clare and Aaron, often when Ethan was working late shifts, had evolved into an illicit relationship. It was reckless, impulsive, and completely out of character for Clare. But that perhaps was why it happened. One rainy evening, while reviewing household bills at the kitchen table, Ethan found a strange text notification pop up on Clare's tablet. A message from Aaron, unmistakably intimate, unmistakably recent. A tight knot formed in Ethan's chest. At first, he tried to dismiss it, rationalize it. Maybe he misunderstood. Maybe there was some other explanation. But the seed of suspicion had been planted. It would not stop growing. Over the next few weeks, Ethan's behavior subtly shifted. He became distant, methodical, observing, gathering. He installed a hidden app on Clare's phone. He checked their shared credit card statements. He even followed her once, his heart pounding, as she left work early and drove not home, but to Aaron's ramshackle apartment across town. The evidence was now undeniable. Something inside Ethan broke, and with that fracture came a cold clarity. He would confront her, and after that, he would make sure she paid for what she had done. Not by rage, not by violence, but by something slower, quieter, untraceable. He was a pharmacist, after all. He knew exactly how to kill without leaving a trace. Ethan didn't sleep the night he confirmed the affair. He lay awake in the darkness of their shared bedroom, listening to Clare's soft breathing beside him, her body curled comfortably under the covers. His mind spun in 1,000 directions, but always circled back to one chilling certainty. She had betrayed him, and she would have to pay. The next morning, he moved through their routine as if nothing had changed. Breakfast, light conversation, a kiss on the cheek as she left for work. But inside, a cold fire burned. He spent his lunch break at the pharmacy reviewing drug catalogs and toxicology reports, under the pretense of updating inventory. Ethan wasn't looking for anything flashy, nothing that would spark suspicion in a toxicology screen. He needed something that mimicked a natural illness, something that could be explained away by a simple autopsy as a rare but tragic event. Over the next week, Ethan carefully began gathering supplies, microdoses, just enough to weaken her system over time, enough to make the eventual fatal dose seem like an unexpected culmination of an existing mysterious illness. He ordered certain compounds through legitimate channels, others he siphoned from expired inventory, careful to keep no record that could tie back to him. Meanwhile, he played the role of the doting husband flawlessly. He brought Clare flowers one evening, cooked her favorite meals, even suggested they plan a small getaway to rekindle their connection. Clare, guilty and confused, clung to these gestures, mistaking his calculated kindness for a sign that the distance between them was closing. One evening, as they sat on the porch sipping wine, Ethan finally broached the subject. "You seem distracted lately," he said gently, swirling his glass. "Is there something you want to tell me?" Clare stiffened, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. She offered a nervous smile. "Just work stress. You know how it is." Ethan studied her, savoring the small cracks appearing in her facade. Over the next few days, he intensified his psychological game, subtle mentions of loyalty, fidelity, trust. Each comment was a carefully aimed needle, pressing against Clare's mounting guilt. He wanted her to confess, He needed her to feel the weight of what she had done before he made his final move. Finally, one rainy Saturday afternoon, as thunder rolled low across Riverview, Claire broke. They were in the kitchen when she blurted it out, her voice trembling. "Ethan, there's something I need to tell you. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake." He set down his coffee cup carefully. "Go on." Tears welled in her eyes. She couldn't look at him. "It was with Aaron. It meant nothing. It was just, I was lonely, and he was there and it just happened. I swear it didn't mean anything." Ethan sat back, folding his hands in his lap. His heart pounded, but outwardly he remained calm. This was the confirmation he needed, delivered straight from her mouth. "I see," he said quietly. Claire sobbed harder, reaching for him. "Please, Ethan, please, I love you. I don't want to lose you." He allowed her to fall into his arms, wrapping his arms around her in a comforting embrace. In that moment, he made the final decision. She would die soon, but first, he would make her believe she had been forgiven. The first dose was almost laughably small. Ethan mixed a barely detectable amount of digitalis extract into Claire's evening tea. A natural toxin derived from foxglove plants, digitalis could cause heart arrhythmias, nausea, weakness, symptoms easily mistaken for a spontaneous cardiac issue, especially in someone under stress. Claire didn't notice anything unusual. She smiled sleepily after finishing her cup, murmured her goodnights, and drifted off to sleep. Ethan lay awake beside her, heart racing, listening to the soft, uneven rhythm of her breathing. Within days, subtle changes began to show. Claire grew more fatigued. She complained of dizzy spells, of feeling faint after climbing stairs, of a fluttering sensation in her chest. She chalked it up to stress and guilt, and Ethan encouraged that narrative, gently suggesting she needed to rest more, to take care of herself. He even proposed that she cut back her hours at work, an offer she gratefully accepted. Ethan maintained the routine with the precision of a craftsman. A few drops here, a slight adjustment there. He kept detailed mental notes of her reactions, careful never to overstep the gradual pace he had planned. If anything, he became even more attentive, earning praise from their friends and neighbors for being such a supportive husband during Claire's difficult time. Aaron remained a looming presence, however, threatening to complicate matters. Despite Claire's attempts to cut him off after her confession, Aaron continued to call and text late-night apologies, rambling voice messages. Claire, racked with guilt and fear, ignored them. But Ethan did not, unbeknownst to her. He had access to her phone records. Every message Aaron left was another log in the fire of Ethan's growing hatred. One afternoon, Ethan ran into Aaron outside the hardware store. Aaron, looking disheveled and jittery, cornered him. "Hey man, listen, I screwed up. I know I did. But Claire's not answering me. I need to fix this. Can't we just talk?" Ethan's face was a mask of civility. "I don't think there's anything to fix, Aaron." Aaron flinched at the coldness in Ethan's voice. "Come on, man. We're brothers." Ethan smiled thinly. "Exactly." He walked away without another word, leaving Aaron standing confused on the sidewalk. Meanwhile, Claire's condition worsened. She struggled to get out of bed some mornings. She grew pale, lost weight. Her hands shook when she tried to button her blouse. She dismissed Ethan's gentle urgings to see a doctor, insisting she just needed rest, that it would pass. Ethan never pressed too hard. He knew a full medical exam could risk everything: blood work, scans, tests. No, it had to appear gradual, inexplicable, tragic. One night, after a particularly bad spell of nausea and faintness, Claire clung to Ethan, tears running down her face. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Something's wrong with me." Ethan kissed her forehead, his voice low and soothing. "It's okay. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." And he meant it, in a way Claire would never understand. By the second month, Claire's decline became undeniable. She now spent most days on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, complaining of crushing fatigue and strange, fluttering pains in her chest. Even the smallest tasks, making coffee, sorting mail, left her breathless. She lost weight at a noticeable pace, her cheeks hollowing, her skin losing its vibrancy. Neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Langston from next door stopped Ethan one morning as he brought out the trash. Claire looks awfully pale lately, she said, frowning. You ought to have her checked out. Ethan smiled politely, the concerned husband. We're working on it. It's just stress. It's been a tough year. Behind the smile, Ethan noted the warning sign. Too many eyes on them. Too much concern could lead to questions he couldn't afford. At home, Claire began to voice the idea of visiting a doctor. It was a risk Ethan hadn't fully anticipated, her natural stubbornness giving way to fear. She sat at the kitchen table one morning, her hands trembling around a mug of untouched tea. I think I need to see someone, she said weakly. Maybe it's my heart. Ethan knelt beside her, his hands wrapping gently around hers. We will, he promised. We'll make an appointment, but let's just take it easy for a few more days, okay? See if it passes? Claire hesitated. Ethan could see her mind warring between fear and the need to believe in his reassurances. Finally, she nodded, trusting him, exactly as he counted on. But external pressure mounted from a direction Ethan hadn't expected. Aaron. That afternoon, a police cruiser pulled into their driveway. Officer Riley, a young patrolman Ethan recognized from town, approached the door, hat in hand. Ethan's stomach tightened as he answered. Good afternoon, sir, Riley said. Mind if I have a word? Of course, Ethan said smoothly, stepping onto the porch. Riley shifted uncomfortably. Your brother, Aaron. He came into the station last night. Seemed pretty upset. Said he's worried about your wife. Claims she might be in some kind of trouble. Ethan's pulse thudded once, hard. Trouble? What kind of trouble? Didn't say much that made sense. He mentioned feeling guilty. Something about fixing things before it's too late. We figured we'd check in, just in case. Ethan kept his face carefully neutral. Claire's been sick, yes. Stress-related. Nothing criminal, officer. Riley nodded, clearly uncomfortable. Right, well, if there's anything you need, you let us know. I appreciate it, Ethan said, offering a reassuring smile that never reached his eyes. After the officer left, Ethan closed the door and leaned against it for a long moment. Aaron was becoming a problem, a dangerous one. He would need to act faster than he planned. That night, Ethan increased Claire's dosage slightly. Still careful, still methodical, but with a grim sense of urgency tightening around his chest. Time, once his ally, was now beginning to turn against him. And somewhere out there, Aaron was unraveling. The walls were beginning to close in. The following days unfolded like a tightening noose. Claire was no longer able to hide her decline, even from herself. She moved slowly, her skin pale and waxy, her hands trembling so violently at times that she had to grip walls for balance. One evening, as Ethan helped her from the living room to their bedroom, she collapsed against him, sobbing in exhaustion. I'm dying, aren't I? She whispered against his chest. Ethan stroked her hair, murmuring soft reassurances but offered no promises. Let her believe it, he thought. Let her spirit weaken along with her body. Still, the risk of outside intervention gnawed at him. Aaron's interference had crossed a line. Ethan knew his brother, impulsive, emotional. If Aaron became desperate enough, he might push the situation into the hands of authorities or Claire's friends. Worse, Aaron might try to see Claire in person. That couldn't happen. One evening, after Claire had fallen into a restless, shallow sleep, Ethan sat at the kitchen table and composed a message from her phone to Aaron. Please stop. It's over. Leave me and Ethan alone. He hesitated only a moment before sending it. A digital severance, a warning. Across town, Aaron received the message, read it 3 times, and hurled his phone across the room. But he got the message. Stay away. For now. Meanwhile, Claire's symptoms grew more alarming. Her vision blurred, her speech sometimes slurred at the edges. One morning she woke gasping, clutching her chest. Ethan comforted her, but knew this was a signal. Her heart was failing. If she reached a hospital now, doctors would find the arrhythmia, the abnormal rhythms. They would question why she hadn't sought treatment earlier. Questions could lead to blood tests. Blood tests could lead to trouble. Ethan decided there could be no more delays, no more slow escalation. It was time to administer the final dose. He meticulously planned the night. It had to look natural. No struggle, no panic. She had to simply go to sleep and not wake up. He prepared her tea that evening with trembling precision, increasing the amount of digitalis enough to guarantee cardiac arrest, but diluted into a second cup so it wouldn't taste bitter. Clare, visibly weaker than ever, sat curled on the couch, a throw blanket wrapped around her thin frame. "You're so good to me," she whispered hoarsely as he handed her the tea. Ethan smiled, sitting beside her. "Always." He watched her sip, watched her eyelids droop with exhaustion. Later, after she fell asleep on the couch, Ethan carried her gently to their bed. He tucked the blankets around her and kissed her forehead one last time. In the dim light of the bedroom, he sat in the armchair and waited. Waited for her breathing to slow. Waited for the silence that would follow. Waited for the final act of the life they had built together. A life he had decided to end. The house was so quiet Ethan could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. Clare lay still under the covers, her breathing shallow, erratic. Then, sometime around 3 in the morning, it simply stopped. There was no drama, no gasping final struggle, no sudden jolt. Just a gradual descent into silence, as if she had finally surrendered to exhaustion. Ethan sat motionless in the armchair for another hour, ensuring no flicker of breath remained. His mind, usually so orderly, felt curiously blank. No triumph, no guilt, just a heavy, suffocating stillness. When the sky outside began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, he finally moved. He rehearsed his story in his mind as he worked. It had to be clean, simple, credible, a tragedy, not a crime. He dressed in casual clothes, nothing too formal, nothing that would seem rehearsed, and made a deliberate show of panic as he discovered Clare unresponsive in bed. His 911 call was measured, frantic, but not overly dramatic. "I can't wake my wife. She's not breathing. Please, someone, help!" The paramedics arrived within minutes, but it was already too late, just as Ethan knew it would be. They worked on her briefly, checking vitals, trying resuscitation protocols, but soon exchanged grim glances. One of them, a young man who couldn't have been more than 25, approached Ethan in the living room where he was pacing. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Miller. Clare has passed." Ethan dropped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Real tears didn't come. He hadn't expected them to, but he produced enough ragged breathing and trembling to sell the image of a man shattered by loss. The coroner was called. A preliminary examination yielded no obvious signs of trauma. Clare's gaunt, frail appearance suggested a pre-existing illness. Ethan made sure to mention, almost as an afterthought, her recent complaints of chest pain, fatigue, and dizziness. Stress, he suggested. A history of heart murmurs that had never been officially diagnosed. It all fit. Everything had been meticulously constructed to fit. Later, the official ruling would be sudden cardiac arrest, a tragic, rare occurrence for someone her age, but not impossible. Friends and neighbors, upon hearing the news, flooded Ethan with sympathy. Mrs. Langston from next door wept openly on his porch. Clare's co-workers organized a modest memorial at the school. Ethan accepted their condolences with the solemn grace of a grieving husband, but not everyone was convinced. 2 days after Clare's death, as Ethan stood by the kitchen sink washing dishes mechanically, there was a knock at the door. When he opened it, he found Aaron standing there, hollow-eyed, unshaven, looking as though he hadn't slept in days. "You killed her," Aaron said hoarsely. No greeting, no preamble. Ethan stared at him, mask firmly in place. "What are you talking about?" Aaron's hands shook at his sides. "I don't know how, but you did. I can feel it." "You're grieving," Ethan said quietly. "We both are." Aaron's chest heaved with anger and guilt, and something dangerously close to clarity. He didn't have proof. Ethan saw that. But suspicion burned in Aaron's eyes like a lit fuse, and Ethan knew Aaron wasn't going to let this go. Not easily. Aaron's visit left a crack in Ethan's carefully built facade. Though the authorities accepted the medical explanations without question, Aaron's suspicion gnawed at the edges of the quiet, grieving husband routine Ethan projected. Worse, Aaron wasn't subtle. In a small town like Riverview, whispered doubts traveled faster than official reports. Over the next few days, Ethan noticed the subtle shift. The neighbors' pitying glances now held a faint undercurrent of uncertainty. Conversations in the grocery store died when he walked past. Mrs. Langston, once gushingly sympathetic, now hesitated a second too long before offering a forced smile. Aaron was talking. He wasn't going to the police, not yet. But he was poisoning the air around Ethan with suspicion, the same way Ethan had poisoned Clare. One evening, Ethan spotted Aaron sitting in his pickup truck across the street from the house, engine idling, lights off, watching, waiting, a heavy, suffocating presence. That night, Ethan lay awake, replaying every move he had made, every precaution he had taken. There had been no autopsy, no toxicology, nothing to tie him to Clare's death. But suspicion didn't require evidence to destroy someone's life. And Aaron, broken and unstable, seemed willing to burn everything down around him if it meant dragging Ethan into the ashes. 2 days later, Ethan's fears escalated. Detective Laura Middleton showed up at his door, plainclothes, badge flashing discreetly. "Mr. Miller, I'm sorry to bother you. Mind if I come in for a few questions?" she asked, her tone polite but edged with professional detachment. Ethan stepped aside, heart hammering. Middleton's questions were casual at first. How had Clare been feeling in the weeks before her death? Any recent doctor visits? Was there a family history of heart disease? Ethan answered smoothly, sticking to the story he had rehearsed. Stress, overwork, minor complaints she'd brushed off, no formal diagnoses. Finally, Middleton closed her notebook. "We've received an informal complaint," she said. "Someone close to your family expressed concerns. No official investigation at this point, just making sure all our bases are covered." "That would be Aaron," Ethan said without hesitation. He even managed a small, sad smile. "He's grieving, and guilt does strange things to people." Middleton studied him for a beat too long. "Maybe so." When she left, Ethan watched her drive away through the window, a tight knot forming in his gut. He had contained the situation for now, but containment wasn't victory. Aaron was a live wire, unpredictable, dangerous, and Ethan knew from experience, one slip, one wrong move, and everything could collapse. That night, Ethan made a decision. He would have to neutralize Aaron, not with poison, not with violence. No, it had to be clean, just like Clare. Aaron had to be discredited, destroyed in the eyes of the town before he could destroy Ethan. And if necessary, pushed to a place where no one would believe a single word he said. Even if that meant pushing him right over the edge. Ethan spent the next few days crafting a new kind of plan, one not rooted in chemicals or silence, but in perception. He understood Aaron's weaknesses better than anyone. His twin had always struggled with impulse control, drinking too much, lashing out when emotions ran high. In the past, Riverview had forgiven Aaron's antics as harmless, but now Ethan intended to weaponize that reputation. He started small. A casual conversation at the pharmacy with Mrs. Langston, phrased with calculated sorrow. "I wish Aaron could find a way to heal. He's not handling Clare's death well, lashing out at everyone." Later, at the grocery store, a sympathetic nod to the cashier. "He showed up drunk the other night, screaming at my house. I didn't know what to do." Each word was carefully planted like a seed, letting people's imaginations do the rest. No direct accusations, just concern, sadness. The town, always hungry for small dramas, began to turn. It didn't take much. Aaron, already emotionally frayed, did the rest himself. Late one night, he appeared again outside Ethan's house, this time shouting loud enough to wake the neighbors. Slurred threats filled the air, warnings that he would expose Ethan, that Clare deserved justice. Lights flicked on along the street. Curtains twitched. Ethan, standing calmly at the window, let him rant. Let the town hear. When the police arrived, this time in 2 cruisers, they found Aaron belligerent, reeking of alcohol, shouting incoherently. It was the perfect scene. Ethan, the grieving widower, stood on the porch in a robe, looking embarrassed and helpless. Officer Riley pulled Ethan aside. "We can charge him with disturbing the peace, trespassing if you want." Ethan shook his head with theatrical compassion. "He's my brother. He's not himself. Please, just get him home safe." It was a masterstroke. Aaron was handcuffed and driven off, roaring threats out the open cruiser window, threats everyone on the block heard. The next day, the gossip solidified into something harder: pity for Ethan, suspicion toward Aaron. People began crossing the street to avoid Aaron's truck at the gas station. Whispers filled the aisles of the grocery store. And Detective Middleton? She returned, speaking this time with a different tone, cautious, more procedural than curious. "Aaron's making a lot of noise," she said. "Claims he has proof." Ethan met her eyes without flinching. "If he does, I'd like to see it." She left shortly after, but Ethan noticed the way she looked around the living room, cataloging things, details. A cop's mind never truly stopped moving. Ethan tightened his control. He went through the house meticulously, discarding anything that might hint at his private research on toxins. He sanitized his digital footprint, wiped his devices clean. He double-checked the pharmacy's inventory logs. No mistakes, no loose ends. And yet he felt it, a tightening pressure in the air, like the humid stillness before a violent storm. Aaron wasn't finished, and Ethan knew that someone who had nothing left to lose could be the most dangerous threat of all. Aaron's next move came faster than Ethan anticipated, and it was more reckless than he could have hoped. 3 days after Aaron's late-night arrest, Ethan received a call from the pharmacy's assistant manager, voice tense with worry. Ethan, there's someone here asking questions. About the inventory, about you." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Who?" "Aaron Miller. Your brother, right?" Ethan thanked her calmly and hung up, but inside, panic tightened its grip. He drove straight to the pharmacy. Aaron was there, wild-eyed, talking loudly to anyone who would listen, accusing Ethan of stealing restricted substances, accusing him of using his pharmaceutical access to murder Clare. Most of the customers and staff kept their distance, exchanging uncomfortable glances, a few recorded videos on their phones. Ethan approached slowly, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Aaron, you need to leave," he said quietly. Aaron whirled on him. Tell them how you poisoned her, how you sat there and watched her die." Ethan shook his head, voice low and sad. "You're sick, Aaron. You need help." Security was called. Aaron was escorted out, still shouting accusations over his shoulder. The damage, Ethan knew, was mixed. On one hand, Aaron looked unhinged, paranoid, drunk on grief and rage. On the other, Aaron had put dangerous ideas into public consciousness, ideas that, even without proof, could fester in the right ears. Detective Middleton showed up again the next morning, grim-faced. "We're opening a formal inquiry," she said without preamble. "Based on Aaron's allegations, the coroner's office has authorized an exhumation for a full autopsy." The words hit Ethan like a hammer. An autopsy. Too much time had passed for certain toxins to show up clearly. But digitalis was tricky. Some traces could linger. Enough, perhaps, to raise questions. Enough to shift suspicion into something tangible. He forced himself to nod, to feign sorrow and understanding. "I want the truth too," he said quietly. Middleton's gaze lingered on him a moment longer than necessary before she left. After the door shut, Ethan sat heavily at the kitchen table, his hands shaking. Aaron had succeeded. He hadn't needed evidence. He had just needed enough noise, enough doubt, enough to crack the story Ethan had so meticulously constructed. That night, alone in the dark house, Ethan stared out the window at the empty street. His mind, usually methodical, raced chaotically. There were no more subtle games to play, no more distractions or deflections. If the autopsy revealed even a sliver of digitalis, questions would follow. Investigations, trials, prison. He couldn't let it get that far. He wouldn't survive it. Aaron had declared war, and Ethan, cornered, saw only one remaining way out. Aaron had to be silenced, for good. And this time, it wouldn't be clean. It would be fast and brutal. The next morning, Ethan stood in his garage, staring at his workbench. Everything in his life had once been arranged like the tools hanging before him, neatly, logically, in perfect order. Now his world felt unrecognizable, chaotic, and Aaron was the cause. The autopsy would take days, maybe a week, long enough for doubts to gather like a storm. Ethan couldn't afford to wait. The only thing more dangerous than a man with evidence was a man with nothing left to lose. He opened a drawer and pulled out a box of latex gloves, slipping them on with practiced ease. Then, from the back of the locked cabinet where he kept old household chemicals, he retrieved a small, unlabeled vial. Not digitalis this time. Too risky. Too traceable. This would have to be physical, messy, final. He wasn't proud of what he was about to do, but pride was no longer part of the equation. Only survival. That afternoon, Ethan called Aaron. To his surprise, Aaron answered, "What do you want?" Aaron's voice was tired, frayed. "I don't want to fight anymore," Ethan said, calm, careful. "We need to talk, please, just you and me." Silence. "Why now?" "Because I can't do this anymore," Ethan replied. "I miss my brother." Another long pause. Then, "Fine. Where?" "The cabin." The Miller family owned a hunting cabin about 30 minutes outside Riverview, isolated, surrounded by thick forest, used only a handful of times a year. Their father had built it when the twins were young, a place meant to bring the family together. It would serve a very different purpose now. They agreed to meet at dusk. Ethan arrived first, parked far from the road, and sat in the dim light of the cabin's kitchen with the vial in his pocket and a crowbar propped behind the door. 2 plans, 2 outs. Aaron arrived late. His face was gaunt, his expression wary. Inside, the air was tense. "I shouldn't have come," Aaron said, standing near the doorway. Ethan gestured to the kitchen table. "I just want to talk." They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Aaron leaned forward. "I know what you did. Maybe I can't prove it, but I know. And so does she." Ethan frowned. "Who?" "Detective Middleton. She hasn't said it, but I can tell. She knows something's wrong." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Then why hasn't she arrested me?" Aaron stared him down. "Because she's giving you room to hang yourself." The words landed like a punch, and suddenly Ethan saw it. Not just the threat Aaron posed, but the inevitability. This wasn't about one man anymore. It was a ticking clock, a system closing in. He reached into his pocket. Aaron stood up fast. "Don't." Ethan froze. In the heavy silence, something shifted between them. Not understanding, but inevitability. Like they both knew how this would end. Aaron turned and walked toward the door. This ends soon, one way or another. And then he was gone. Ethan stood alone in the cabin's flickering light, fingers still wrapped around the vial he hadn't used. This wasn't over, but now it would have to end in daylight, in front of the world. And Ethan would need a new plan. The morning after the cabin confrontation, Ethan sat alone at his kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cold mug of coffee. The quiet house that had once comforted him now felt hollow. Every creak in the floorboards a warning, every knock at the door a threat. He hadn't slept. In the corner of the living room, Claire's favorite throw blanket remained draped over the armchair where she used to sit. He hadn't moved it. Couldn't. His phone buzzed, startling him. A message from the medical examiner's office. Autopsy complete. Results forwarded to Detective Middleton. His breath hitched. He stared at the screen as if willing the message to rewrite itself. The silence that followed was louder than any accusation. By noon, the entire town buzzed with rumor. Ethan stepped out to pick up groceries and felt the shift. Conversations stopped when he walked into the store. People looked at him too long, or not at all. Word was spreading. Back home, he found Detective Middleton waiting on his front porch. She didn't smile. "Can we go inside?" Inside, she didn't bother with small talk. The toxicology showed digitalis in Clare's system, not enough to be obvious to a rushed coroner. But it's there, consistent with prolonged exposure. Ethan remained quiet. Middleton set a file on the coffee table. "We'll be requesting access to your pharmacy logs, your disposal records, digital communications, all of it." Still, Ethan said nothing. Finally, she added, "You're not under arrest. Yet. But I suggest you don't leave town." After she left, Ethan stood in the middle of the living room, paralyzed. His brain spun, calculating possibilities. Escape, destruction of evidence, legal angles. But each plan unraveled under the weight of the truth. They had found it. The poison. the pattern, the timeline. He poured himself a drink, sat down, and turned on the TV just for noise. A local news update flickered across the screen, Claire's face smiling, the banner below reading, "Wife's death reinvestigated as homicide." Everything was unraveling in real time. That evening, Aaron showed up again. This time, he didn't knock. He just stood on the porch as the sun sank behind him, casting him in shadow. Ethan opened the door slowly. "I told you it would end," Aaron said. His voice was quiet, steady. Ethan stared at his brother. The same face, the same eyes, now a mirror of everything Ethan had tried to bury. "It didn't have to be this way," Ethan said. "No," Aaron replied, "but you made it that way." There was no rage left in either of them, only resignation. Aaron stepped back from the porch, and Ethan stood alone in the doorway, watching the man who had become both witness and executioner walk away into the night. He knew what would come next. Arrest, trial, the end of the version of himself that had once believed he could commit the perfect crime. And all because of one thing he had never anticipated. That guilt might not be what destroys a man, but someone else's conscience just might. The next morning, Ethan awoke to the sound of his name on the news. Ethan Miller, local pharmacist, is now under official investigation for the suspected murder of his wife, Clare Miller. He didn't hear the rest. The world outside his windows had changed overnight. Reporters began arriving by mid-morning. Local channels first, then regional. Cameras stationed across the street. Neighbors who once waved now peered from behind blinds. The quiet anonymity he'd once valued in Riverview had turned against him. Everyone knew. By noon, the police had sealed off the pharmacy pending a full forensic sweep. Ethan wasn't allowed to enter. His name was suspended from the State Board of Pharmacy Registry by the end of the day. He was done. Detective Middleton returned with a warrant and a small team of officers. They searched the house, the garage, the garden shed. She didn't speak much as they moved through the rooms, but her silence said everything. When she found the notebook where Ethan had once jotted dosages and symptoms, hidden behind an HVAC panel, she didn't even flinch. She just bagged it. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, numb, while they combed through the last remnants of his control. That evening, he received a call from a public defender. "You should come in voluntarily," the lawyer advised. "It'll look better than being taken in cuffs." Ethan didn't respond. He stood in the hallway outside the bedroom he and Claire had shared. Her perfume bottle still sat untouched on the vanity. Her slippers remained by the door, as if she might come back any minute and slip them on. He thought about how small the first decision had been. A single drop of poison. And now it had come to this. The collapse of everything he had built. All because he believed he could script life and death like a pharmacist compounding a custom cure. A knock at the door. Ethan opened it to find Aaron again. No words. Just a long look. Tired, hollow, but firm. They stood in silence until Aaron said quietly, "You still have time to choose how this ends." And then he left. Aaron didn't want vengeance. He wanted truth, and Ethan knew it. That night, Ethan sat at his desk and typed a letter. Not a confession, not exactly. More like a reckoning. He detailed Claire's decline, his observations, the cold logic he used to justify each step. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't expect it. He printed it, signed it, and sealed it in an envelope. Then he called Middleton's direct line and left a message. "I'm ready." When she arrived with 2 officers the next morning, Ethan was dressed and waiting. He didn't speak as they read him his rights. He didn't resist when they cuffed him. He didn't look back as they led him out the front door into the cold morning light, past cameras, neighbors, the empty street. His story was no longer his to control. Ethan's arraignment took place 3 days later, under the weight of flashbulbs, reporters, and a courtroom full of hushed townspeople. He wore a gray suit, no tie, wrists shackled, eyes hollow. The charge was read clearly: first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances, premeditated poisoning of a spouse. The judge denied bail. Ethan showed no emotion as he was remanded into custody, only glancing once toward the gallery where Aaron sat, arms folded, jaw clenched. The letter Ethan had written became part of the prosecution's preliminary exhibits. It was damning not because it confessed outright, but because of its cold, clinical tone, a breakdown of symptoms, reactions, and timing, more like a lab report than a reflection of remorse. The prosecutors painted it as the work of a man who had treated murder like a controlled experiment. The media ran with that image. The pharmacist killer, a calculated husband, murder by the milligram. In the following weeks, the case captured statewide attention. Interviews with Clare's co-workers and neighbors filled the evening news. People who once called Ethan a pillar of the community now described him as distant, too quiet, off. Hindsight rewrote everything. Detective Middleton, though rarely seen in front of cameras, quietly led the case with methodical precision. The prosecution team, led by ADA Caroline Birch, constructed a narrative of betrayal, control, and silent violence. The defense, a public attorney named Daniel Frost, leaned into mental fatigue, emotional breakdown, and grief mismanagement. He hinted at Ethan's unraveling sense of self and suggested that Clare's affair had triggered something deeper and untreated. But even Frost knew the case wasn't winnable. The evidence was strong, the motive was clear, the timeline aligned. At the pre-trial hearing, Aaron was called as a witness. He stepped into the courtroom with no notes, no legal coaching, just steady, deliberate truth. He spoke about the affair, not proudly, but honestly. He spoke of guilt, of Clare's growing fear, of Ethan's cold change, of his own suspicions and how he watched, helpless as no one believed him, until the science finally did. He didn't look at Ethan once, but Ethan watched him the whole time. When court recessed, Aaron exited through a back hallway, avoiding the reporters. He didn't need the spotlight. He only wanted the truth to land where it belonged. Ethan, now in a holding cell beneath the courthouse, listened as the metal door slammed behind him. The world outside was gone. The clean lines of his life had dissolved into fluorescent lights, scratchy uniforms, and the distant echo of voices he no longer recognized. But even here, in the pit of consequence, his mind wouldn't stop turning. He thought about Clare, not her death, but the way she once looked at him on Sunday mornings, coffee in hand, smiling at nothing in particular. And for the first time since her final breath, Ethan felt it. Not guilt, but loss. The trial lasted 8 days. 8 days of testimony, of timelines, of autopsy results projected on screens, of the prosecution building a quiet but devastating narrative. Clare hadn't died in her sleep. She had been guided there, milligram by milligram, by a man who had chosen control over confrontation, who had decided silence was cleaner than divorce, than shame. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. When the foreperson stood, the air inside the courtroom turned still. On the count of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Ethan's expression didn't change. Not when the verdict was read, not when the courtroom murmured, not when Aaron, seated in the gallery's front row, lowered his head and finally exhaled. Ethan was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. There would be no deals, no appeals, no future where he walked free again. The judge, in her closing remarks, said only, "This was a slow death carried out by a man who thought he could outthink grief. You didn't just poison your wife, you poisoned trust." Ethan was led out of the courtroom in cuffs, past reporters, past former neighbors who now stared at him as if he were something they couldn't understand. But Aaron understood. In the months that followed, Aaron returned to therapy, found sobriety, and stopped speaking publicly about the case. He declined interviews. He didn't write a book. He refused to become a spectacle. He said what he needed to say in court, and then went quiet. Instead, he set up a small scholarship in Clare's name at the school where she worked, for young women pursuing education in counseling, a field Clare had once considered switching to before her death. He visited her grave often, not out of guilt anymore, but memory. As for Ethan, his first few months in prison passed without incident. He kept to himself, spoke rarely, refused visits even from attorneys. But every morning, in the hour before the other inmates stirred, he would sit in the corner of his cell with a worn notebook writing. No one knew what. Letters, reflections, calculations. It didn't matter. What mattered was that, for the first time, he no longer had control. The tragedy of Clare's death was no longer just a line in a coroner's report. It had become something larger, a wound left behind by a man who believed love could be measured and administered like a prescription. And in the end, the only cure had come too late.